We're able to live thanks to the hard work of farmers. I insist to my soon-to-be father-in-law, but he ignores me. He mocks farming, saying it doesn't make any real money, and even laughs, daring me to show him the life of a farmer. Fine, I think. I'll take him to my family's farm, and he'll see for himself. My name is Henry. I used to work in sales, but when my dad's health got worse, I took over the family farm. I'm the second son, but my older brother moved overseas for work, so I'm the only one left to carry on the family business. I had a strong-willed, sweet fiancée named Allie. I fell in love with her the moment I saw her working at our local cafe. We've been together for 2 years now, and she recently accepted my marriage proposal. Now, I'm about to meet her parents for the first time. As I look up at their fancy high-rise building, I feel nervous. Allie reassures me, saying, "Don't worry, Henry, I've already told my mom about you." But my dad, well, he's another story. I know her dad is a serious man who owns a few restaurants, which only makes me more anxious. When I go in and greet them, though, both her parents welcome me warmly. Her dad starts by apologizing, saying he's been busy with work and hasn't been able to meet sooner. Then he proudly talks about how well his business is doing. "Henry, I hear you were the top performer in sales. You must be making good money, right? Do you have any plans on where you want to live in the future? How about moving into this high-rise condo?" He asks, firing off questions. I can only smile politely, trying to keep up. Allie's mom, noticing my discomfort, steps in and says, "You're being rude to Henry," while pouring tea. "Thank you, the tea is very good," I say, feeling a little more relaxed as I sip. The tea's delicious taste helps calm my nerves. I was starting to feel angry as my future father-in-law made fun of my home and my parents. But it was Allie who stood up first. She yelled, "I can't believe you're insulting farmers. I'm ashamed to be your daughter." Her dad got furious and slapped her. My mother-in-law was upset that he would hate their daughter. Allie, now crying from the slap, had turned the situation into total chaos. Her father shouted, "You're living in this high-rise condo thanks to me. You should be grateful. I don't care who a daughter like you marries." I took Allie, who was sobbing, and we left her parents' home. I couldn't forgive my father-in-law for insulting farming and hitting Allie. Later, I called my dad and told him everything my father-in-law had said. "He owns restaurants, doesn't he?" My dad asked. He wanted the name of the restaurant and my father-in-law's name, so I told him. My dad then said he had an idea and hung up before I could ask what he meant. A bit later, my dad called back and gave me some instructions. I went to meet a few people, as he suggested. Later, Allie and I went back to see my mother-in-law, who apologized for her husband's arrogant attitude. She explained that ever since his restaurant business became successful, he'd moved into a high-rise condo to show off. Now, he often looked down on people who made less money than him, including farmers. He even mocked her family's tea farm regularly, and his affairs with other women were no secret. My mother-in-law admitted she put up with it all just for Allie's sake. "I don't want to make trouble for Allie and Henry by getting a divorce," she said. "She's a kind person who thinks about Allie and me." I reassured her, "Don't worry about us. Please think about your own happiness." She smiled and thanked me. I also wanted to help my brother, who had inherited our family's tea farm. I don't want to see our family's farm, which has been passed down for generations, go out of business. My mother-in-law told me. She reminded me how important the tea farm was and then said, "I've decided I'm going to divorce him and move back to my parents' house." Her mind was already made up. Finally, the day arrived to bring my in-laws to see my family's home. After we got off the plane, we drove for another hour, passing by vast fields and farms. My father-in-law looked out the window and muttered, "I can't believe people actually live in such a rural area." Allie and my mother-in-law looked uncomfortable but stayed quiet, probably to avoid starting an argument. He then sneered, "I'm excited to see this farm life. Is the bathroom outside or something?" He laughed loudly, mocking us. I just replied, "You'll see when we get there." Soon, we arrived at a large gate with high walls. I spoke into the intercom, saying, "I'm back. and I've brought everyone with me." The gate opened automatically. My father-in-law looked shocked, mumbling, "What a grand gate, and look at this beautiful garden." Ali was thrilled and started praising the scenery. Our garden was designed like an English garden because my parents love Europe. Roses, my mother's favorite, were planted all around. My mother-in-law wandered happily through the garden, enjoying the scent of the flowers, while my father-in-law muttered about the garden being tacky. I led them to our family home, a big brick house with 12 rooms, a large living and dining area, and a kitchen. In front of the house, we had 2 luxury cars and 3 off-road motorcycles parked. All the land around us was our farmland. My in-laws and Ali stared in shock. My parents greeted us at the entrance, smiling at my father-in-law. They weren't wearing overalls or anything like he probably expected. When we entered the living room, a few of my relatives were already there, all dressed in suits. Meanwhile, my father-in-law was just in jeans and a t-shirt, looking quite out of place. "Ah, hello," he said quietly, clearly feeling uncomfortable. My father introduced him to the relatives. "This is Ali, Henry's fiancée, and these are her parents." It seems Ali's father has quite a prejudice against farmers. "Were you surprised to see our home isn't a shanty hut?" The relatives all looked at my father-in-law with cold expressions. It was clear he felt embarrassed, and he stammered, "No, that's not what I meant." A group of men stepped forward, catching my father-in-law off guard. "Why are you all here?" he asked, surprised, his eyes wide. One of the men replied, "We're disappointed in you." These men were organic farmers who supplied vegetables to the restaurants my father-in-law owned. After hearing his rude remarks about farmers, my father had contacted them. My father, who has been farming for years, has many connections. I had told the farmers about my father-in-law's insulting comments. It turned out that my father-in-law had always been arrogant with them, and they had plenty of complaints. Outraged by his attitude, they had come to confront him directly. "We want to end our business relationship after this contract," one of the farmers said, and the others nodded in agreement. My father-in-law panicked. "Wait, hold on. We're known for our organic vegetables." His restaurants, especially popular with women, prided themselves on using fresh, healthy ingredients, but it seemed he only cared about profits, even if it meant insulting the farmers who supplied those vegetables. Thinking he could still pressure them, he said, "Are you sure? You'll lose your income if you stop supplying us." I stepped in, expecting him to say something like that. I explained that I had used my contacts in the industry to help the farmers find new business partners, so they wouldn't lose income by cutting ties with his restaurants. Hearing this, my father-in-law started to tremble. "What am I supposed to do if I can't get vegetables?" he muttered, holding his head in his hands. My father calmly replied, "Why not ask Henry? We also grow organic vegetables." Despite my father-in-law's rude remarks, we had been focusing on organic farming ourselves, growing things like cherry tomatoes that were especially sweet thanks to improved methods. Several companies had even asked to work with us. My father-in-law turned to me, looking hopeful, but I just smiled and said, "Of course, we refuse to do business with you." He slumped, looking defeated. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law and our parents enjoyed a cheerful conversation, with my mother-in-law promising to bring fresh tea from her hometown next time. My parents were delighted. On the drive back, my father-in-law's anger exploded. "How dare you cancel the deal? Do you want my business to go under?" he shouted from the back seat. I didn't care what happened to his restaurants. Ignoring him, I kept my focus on Ali, while he continued to rant, even saying, "And you, my own wife, didn't defend me. This is why I hate countrywomen." Ignoring his words, I felt proud of my family and their values. His anger then turned toward my mother-in-law. "Don't you prefer city women?" she replied calmly. "Mary is your current favorite, isn't she?" The car went silent. "Henry hired a detective, and since you didn't hide your actions, gathering evidence was easy." My mother-in-law continued, "Please handle the divorce papers and alimony payments." My father-in-law's face turned pale. "Divorce? How do you plan to survive without my money?" he asked. She explained that she planned to work on her brother's tea farm after the divorce. Smirking, he said, "That farm is practically bankrupt. Fine, I'll divorce you. Living with a younger woman sounds better than with an aging wife." No one spoke after that, and a tense silence filled the car. When we arrived at the airport, my father-in-law quickly headed for the gate, not wanting to stay with us any longer. Ellie watched him go, muttering sadly, "To think such a man is my father." "He'll definitely regret his choice," I said, putting my arm around her. A few days later, the divorce was finalized. With clear evidence of his affair, he was fully responsible for alimony. Desperate to end things, he tried to buy my mother-in-law off, telling her, "Take the money and go." Ellie and I were angry when we heard this, but my mother-in-law just laughed, saying she'd received plenty. She got $50,000 in alimony from my father-in-law and another $15,000 from his mistress. She planned to use this money to help revive her brother's tea farm. Meanwhile, my father-in-law moved into a fancy high-rise condo with his mistress. Not knowing what was coming, her husband soon found out and turned their new home into a battleground. We'd known from the investigation that my father-in-law's mistress was actually a married woman, so we expected things to end badly for them. My father-in-law, now being sued for alimony by his mistress' husband, must have finally learned a lesson about relationships. Despite everything, he's still living alone in his high-rise condo. His poor reputation has spread among farmers, causing many to stop doing business with him. This forced him to close down several of his restaurants that specialized in organic vegetables. Feeling lonely, he started sending letters to my mother-in-law at her parents' house, begging her to come back. At first, she read the letters, but now she just throws them away without opening them. Once, he even called, but she cut him off, saying, "If you're lonely, why don't you leave the high-rise?" We all laughed when she told us that. Eventually, he moved to a small apartment, though we're not sure if it was because he couldn't stand being alone in such a big place or if he just couldn't afford it anymore. Since I took over the farm, life has been busy, but having Ellie by my side is a huge help. I doubt she ever imagined she'd become a farmer's wife, but she came along without a single complaint. I feel so grateful for her. I think I'm starting to enjoy farming. It must be in my blood from my mom. Ellie's laugh makes every day better. A year later, we had a big wedding. My father-in-law didn't attend, which I'm sure made him sad since it was his only daughter's wedding. My mother-in-law gifted us freshly packed tea from her farm to serve at the wedding. Thanks to her hard work, the tea farm, once near bankruptcy, is now on its way to making a good profit. Their tea is as fragrant and delicious as ever.